Let me give you some context. I'm a woman in my early 20s, attending a university in the city, which is about a 45-minute train ride away from my suburban town. I've been happily in a relationship for 5 years now. So, back in February, I was doing my usual routine. I headed to the train station around 2:30 in the afternoon to catch my train back home. I walked up to the platform, a bit out of breath from climbing all those steps to get there, and leaned against one of those freestanding platform advertisements just to catch my breath. While I was catching my breath, I noticed a larger guy nearby. He didn't look much older than me, wearing a long black pea coat and dark pants. He was standing pretty close, but at first he didn't seem threatening. Then out of nowhere, he smashes his hand against the billboard, like he fell into it or something. I looked over at him, and he immediately says, "Sorry," in this creepy, light Michael Jackson-sounding voice, which was odd coming from a guy his size. He was around 220 pounds and about 5'7" or 5'8". That whole thing struck me as peculiar. It seemed like he intentionally banged into the billboard to get my attention, even though it looked pretty stupid. It just didn't sit right with me. After that odd encounter, we started chatting while waiting for the train. Now, this entire interaction happened within just 5 minutes, because I always make sure to get to the train with only a little time to spare. I don't like hanging around the station after school because it doesn't have the best reputation for safety, and the crime rate is relatively high. This guy bothered me right from the start, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was that I didn't like about him just yet. I'm the kind of person who gives people a chance before forming a solid opinion about them, so I thought maybe I'd make a friend at the train station and not always be alone. The train arrived shortly after, and I got on it, with him following closely behind. Nothing unusual so far, as the train gets pretty crowded when it arrives. There weren't any empty seats for both of us, so I sat next to someone else, and he sat behind me with someone else too. I kept my head down, playing games and listening to music on my phone. Just my usual routine. I was content and didn't really feel like turning around in my seat to talk to him. Even when the train emptied out at the last stop, he kept sitting right where he was. Finally, when we arrived at our stop, I got up, pulled out my headphones, and he just said, "Candy Crush?" So, I happily nodded and told him that I'm addicted to playing it. It was just normal chatter, but it was a bit unnerving that he kept peering over the seats to look at what I was doing. It wasn't too abnormal, I guess. We both got off the train and walked back to our respective cars. But when we reached a row of cars in the parking lot, things got awkward. I expected us to part ways, but he said something like, "Well, here's where I parked. It was nice meeting you," and gave me a look like he expected a hug, even though we'd just met. I just stuck out my hand, shook his, and went on my way. The next day came, and it was a Friday, I believe, after meeting him on a Wednesday. This time I managed to grab a seat with him on the train ride back from school. We tried to have a conversation, but it felt so forced. I wasn't enjoying anything he was saying, but I forced myself to agree anyway. He talked about how he's the life of the party when he plays blues on the guitar and how he works at McDonald's. Throughout the conversation, the eye contact was odd. I'd glance away quickly, and he'd just keep staring at me. Who knows what he was thinking? I wasn't happy at all with how I felt after that conversation. I can't be friends with someone if I don't enjoy talking to them. So I got up and walked off the train with him yet again. We walked back to our cars, which were parked right next to each other. By this point, I was feeling kind of weirded out. I wondered if this guy was watching me because I sure felt that way. This time, before parting, he asked for my number. I said nicely, How about Facebook? Do you have that? I guess I can add you on there." I was hoping he'd get some sort of hint from that. I don't typically like to randomly slip into a conversation that I have a boyfriend, so I figured he'd add me on Facebook and see my relationship status and all. The weekend came, and I really didn't like encountering this guy at the train station. I knew he was right behind me, but luckily on the train, we got split between the conductor. Then I got a message on my phone from my Facebook Messenger app. I replied, "Sorry, got caught up with the conductor," and he responded with, "No problem. I just wanted to listen to music by myself today anyway," and left it at that. When I got to my stop, I was pretty nervous about making that 2-minute walk back to my car. So, I called up my boyfriend, partly to look busy, and partly to have him on the line in case this guy decided not to back off. But nope, he was still following me. Finally, I walked back to my car, and this time he parked in a different spot and a different row from me. I got in my car and drove home. I'm not a particularly paranoid person, but that was the first time someone actually creeped me out to the point where I had to put real thought into ways to avoid this guy. After the phone incident, I continued to avoid him with a quick, "Okay," and walked off. Problem solved, or so I thought. When I arrived back at the parking lot, I went to my car without hardly a worry. This time, I didn't rush as much. I pulled out of the parking lot and made my way home. When I was about 5 minutes away from my house, I saw an old red car speeding in the opposite direction. It was that classic Monte Carlo, and the driver looked pretty familiar. My heart was racing by this point, and my gut told me it was him. I wondered why he might be driving around there. He didn't come over, and he didn't speak to me, so for now, I felt safe. Back when I was 16, I was part of this exchange program between my American high school and a school in Germany. It turned out that my best friend Rebecca was in it too, along with her partner Catherine, who happened to be Vanessa's best friend. We all got along great, and the four of us were pretty much inseparable during the program. One day we decided to head into Nuremberg for some shopping. Vanessa and Catherine lived on the same street, and the subway station was just a 10-minute walk from their place. As we were riding the escalator down to catch the subway, we heard someone whistling at us. We assumed it was some guy just fooling around, so we looked around to see who it was. The whistling happened again, and this time, we locked eyes with a man riding the up escalator while we were going down. This guy looked like he was in his late 50s or early 60s, and he was massive, easily around 7 feet tall and close to 300 pounds. In a silly moment, the four of us waved at him, not thinking he'd take it seriously. But to our surprise, he saw it as an invitation to start terrorizing us. He began sprinting up the escalator, pushing people out of the way, and then got on our escalator, heading down to reach us. Despite his size, he was moving fast. By this point, we were nearly at the bottom, so we sprinted away. Luckily, the train we needed was already there, and we hopped on, relieved that we had escaped the creepy guy, or so we thought. The train was divided into sections, and there were see-through doors between them. About a minute into our ride, we spotted the guy moving through the section in front of ours. We immediately stood up and ran to the next section, hoping to find a more crowded one where we could hide. This cat-and-mouse game continued for a while until we realized we'd reached the front of the train. We grabbed seats closest to the front, and sure enough, the man barged into our section. He sat across from us, grinning maliciously, with bulging eyes, and even started drooling. It was terrifying. We whispered to each other in English, hoping he wouldn't understand, and decided that at the next stop, we'd bolt off the train and find help. When the train finally stopped, we dashed off, trying to find anyone who could assist us. As we turned to make sure he wasn't following, we noticed that he hadn't left the train. Instead, he'd shifted to get a clear view through the window by his seat. We watched, and as the train pulled away, he widened his smile and began slowly waving at us. We didn't break eye contact or stop waving until the train was completely out of sight. We were left shaken and bewildered, not knowing what that guy wanted or why he was so determined to chase us through the train. Maybe he planned to get off at our stop, but changed his mind due to the crowd, realizing he wouldn't get away with whatever he had in mind. All I know is that I was scared out of my mind during that encounter. Hey there. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, and I weigh around 130 pounds. My job involves overnight shifts at the airport, from 8 p.m. to 4:15 a.m., and I usually rely on the train to get from my parking spot to my workplace. Typically, I feel quite safe because the train is usually packed with fellow airport employees commuting to and from work, especially during my shift. However, one particular morning was quite different. My husband was supposed to pick me up, but he overslept, leaving me to rely on the train. I decided to ride the train to a bus stop about 20 minutes down the line, then catch a bus to the stop closest to my house, which was about a 2-mile walk. When I boarded the train that morning, it was fairly crowded, like usual. I took a seat near the back and noticed a scruffy-looking guy striking up conversations with some flight attendants a few doors down. I mean, when I say scruffy, I'm talking long, dirty hair, a scraggly beard, and grimy hands. Considering the diverse workforce at the airport, I figured he probably worked for the same airline they did, possibly as a mechanic or baggage handler. I didn't think much of it beyond my initial observation. To make the ride more comfortable, I plugged in my headphones, pulled out a book, and started reading. As the train pulled into the next stop, all the airport employees got off, leaving just me and the scruffy man. That's when things got uncomfortable. He wasn't just giving me an occasional glance. He was openly staring at me, wide-eyed and open-mouthed. I tried to ignore it, hoping he'd just limit his weirdness to staring. Unfortunately, he didn't stop there. When I looked away, he began moving closer. First, he stood at the end of my row, still staring. Then he sat across from me. He even moved to the seat directly behind me. I was seriously creeped out by this point. I kept my eyes glued to my book, fearing that making eye contact would invite more unwanted attention. Then, it got worse. He leaned in so close that I could feel his breath on my hair. And then, his finger lightly ran down the side of my neck. I was really unnerved at this point. I jerked away and heard him hiss something. I knew I needed to act fast. The train was approaching another stop, so I hatched a plan. As soon as the doors opened, I bolted from my seat, ran to the next car, and peeked out the window to see if he followed. Thankfully, he was still in the first car, looking around the empty station. He hadn't seen me slip away into the second car. By the time the train reached the bus station, my frantic phone calls had finally woken up my husband, and he met me in the car. I'll never know if that scruffy guy intended to get off at the bus station, but I'm relieved I didn't have to find out by enduring a bus ride with him. Since that unsettling experience, I've taken up Muay Thai kickboxing for self-defense. I'm only a few weeks in, but I'm getting pretty good at throwing a jab-right hook combo now. It's a small step toward feeling safer in situations like that. Hello, everyone! If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to create more content you'll love. Thanks a million. And if you've just subscribed, please drop a comment saying I subscribed. We'd love to welcome you to our community.